Ladies and gentlemen, next panel is starting now. It's interview style, Mark Norman. I'm sure you've seen all the fantastic things at one end of the dealer's room. I'm here to explain all about it. Big round of applause, please. James Burgess.
Yes, everybody, welcome James to Armadacon for the very first time. Those of you that have been here for many years will, I'm sure, be able to explain to James how this works a little bit like Oyster and Daisy from here on now. We shall look forward to seeing you every single year from now until the end of time. Absolutely, you will know. So, James is, for as those of you who have been next door will have seen, James is a monster creator, a sculptor, an artist, spinner, weaver. The only person I know who made an authentic set of William Hartnell Doctor Who trousers by weaving the material himself from the original pattern on a loom. That's correct. Once is enough. You arguably don't need to do it more than once.
No, once you've done it, you've lived the experience. I think.
Am I right in thinking your Tom Baker scarf is screen accurate down to the holes?
It's not the holes, it's the colour transitions.
The colour transitions.
Because there are several different ways that you can change colours when you're knitting. But the lady who originally knitted the Doctor Who scarf for Begonia Pope had a slightly clumsy way of doing it, where she sort of grabbed both colours at once and knitted them for a few. So if you look really closely at the original scarf, you can see these little speckles of the old colour at the start of each new colour. So what I've done is I've counted the speckles at every block on the scarf and copied them.
So the point I'm trying to make here is that James's reconstructions are quite accurate. I do encourage you to have a close look at the scarf, for example, when you go next door to someone. You can purchase the scarf if you go next door. We'll talk about that later. James is all of these things. And yet, although I've known James for a few years, he still appears to only be about 14. So either you never age, or alternatively, you started this at a very young age. How did you start doing what you are now?
Well, I started by wanting to make monsters, because growing up, I remember very vividly having a set of Doctor Who books with black and white photos of Sontarans, Ice Warriors and Cybermen in, and I remember looking through it a lot and thinking, I need this sort of thing in my life. And the time came once when I was about 9 or 10, when my dad here in the second row back made the foolish error of taking me to a world record attempt at biggest number of homemade Daleks in one place ever. And so, of course, my next question was, when can we build a Dalek, Dad? And he's sitting there shaking his head. Yeah, we built one, and then we built another, and then I think we've made about 3.5 now. But once I built a Dalek and discovered that carpentry and fiberglassing are things that anyone can learn to do, and you can make a certain number of classic Doctor Who monsters that way, I realised that the only way that anyone is going to make more exciting monsters is to turn to clay. So, yes, I must have been about 13 or 14 when I started pushing clay around, and none of it was very good, but to me it was exciting enough that I would go from one project to the next, and I'd enjoy that enough that I'd go on to the next one. And then, of course, every time Halloween comes around, oh, shall I make a mask for myself? Yes, I'll make a mask. And then I discovered that people do it for a living. So school sort of became this peripheral thing from then on.
This is all your fault, Mike, you realise that?
Yeah. My school was a very strange place. They asked us in the assembly at the beginning of the year to refer to it as the Duston Academy. To which we sort of looked at each other and looked at the big sign on the front of the building that said school and decided we would call it what it was. But they liked to call us in for career interviews, which was a bit like what we're doing now. You know, there was a table and there was someone sitting and asking you questions, and they'd say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" As if they're interviewing you for something. And I remember one year I said, "Well, I think I'd like to be some kind of a scientist." And they said, "That's a very competitive field." I said, "All right, then I won't." And then the very next year I discovered that, you know, people make Doctor Who monsters for a living, week on week, and I'd already made a Dalek. Why couldn't I make more monsters? And I was making masks, and I found that sculpture was this thing that spoke to me in a way that nothing else had ever spoken to me. And they called me back again the next year for a careers interview, and they sat down. I think it was the same person with the same pencils, and they said, "What would you like to be as a career when you grow up?" I said, "I think I've got it. I want to be a sculptor and a prop maker." And they said, "That's a very competitive field." I said, "Well, I'll just have to be the best then."
Yes. Yes.
So there you go. Career advice for everybody who needs career advice at this stage is just do what you feel is the right thing to do. And ultimately it pans out like this.
If it speaks to you,
Yeah.
you'll feel a lot more fulfilled. And people still say to me, "Is this what you want to do for a job?"
Yeah.
Am I secretly very good at geography or something?
No, you're not.
And this like geography business on the side. So you now do this full time.
Yes.
How did that transition work from being what started as, I guess, a hobby at that stage, and then you going, actually, this is a career, albeit a competitive one, but one that you can get into? Was that a tough process to transition through?
It was. If there are instruction books on how to be self-employed, I never found any. Yeah, there's at least one self-employed person in the years in the room there just went.
Yeah.
Yes, well, I think I just started making things, and then friends of mine on a very small scale would say, "I'd quite like one of them," and I'd say, "Well, I'll do it for you for the princely sum of £15. And then as time goes on, you sort of knock off the rough edges and keep on getting better. And I think it really kicked off in college when I was studying art, and they said, "Right, I want you all to go and find work experience for a week." And I thought, well, I'd made probably the wise decision at that point to go and Facebook friend all of the effects artists that I could find on there, and had already messaged a few of them, and there was one particular one who I thought back and realised, oh, he had offered to give me work experience ages ago, and for some reason I never took him up on it. So I messaged him back and I said, "Is the offer for work experience still available?" He said, "Yeah, come along," and that was the English national offer.
Wow.
So, and the reason that they had me in there was because the head of the department was a big Doctor Who fan. So, of course, he sees somebody sending him pictures of Doctor Who monsters, and had me along, and I went in my smartest clothing to try and make the best professional impression I could. And I was halfway through the door, and he said, "So what do you think of the new Doctor?" And I won't say which Doctor it was or what we said about them, but anyway, I sat down and I thought, okay, I think we'll get on with him, but I just need to not let people know that I'm a human being and a fan of all this stuff. And so I was as casual as I could, and I sat down at this desk, and it was full of all kinds of arty supplies and bits and bobs and pieces of sculpture and little silicone moulds. And I looked in front of me, and there on the desk was a little rubber testicle with a sort of a squirty spout coming out the top of it. And I didn't want to ask about it, so I thought, well, okay, I'm clearly in with similar-minded people. And I say to the bloke as he walks past, so what's the story of of this here? And he says, oh, that's for an opera. As if that explained anything. I said, oh, is there a lot of that sort of thing in opera? He said, yeah, we tried to make a mould of somebody's testicle, but it got stuck in the mould. We had to sculpt one. So you can bet I spent the rest of that week trying to figure out who it was who got stuck in that situation. And it seems to be a rule, a law of nature, that every effects place I've ever gone to work at, there is something rude hanging on the wall, or off a hat stand, or just left on the desk. Operas, what can I say?
I'll be honest, that wasn't the direction I thought that question was. Okay. You have worked with various effects companies, as you say. Am I right in remembering? My brain is getting old. You did some work with Millennium Effects on.
It wasn't Millennium Effects.
It wasn't Millennium,
it was Robert Alsop and Associates.
Okay, but that was on.
It was on Doctor Who. Yes.
What did you do?
In Jodie Whittaker's first season, there was a robot-type creature. It was an army of robots, but it was a new character called the Sniper Bots. And they had these sort of boxy heads with a light on the front, and a kind of khaki militaristic hooded jacket with lots of pockets all over it, and sort of robotic arms. And I came in to do a couple of weeks' work, where they were clearly coming toward the end of that season. You never know what it is they're working on at any given time. It's not like they say, we're about to work on Doctor Who. You just go in and hope that there's Doctor Who to be had. And the first job that they gave me was, there's a robot, we need you to do some fiberglassing on it. It's a returning one. So of course I'm thinking, oh, I wonder what that could be. I didn't realise it was a returning one that was still yet to be on telly. And they said, we can't find the mould, and just for context, this is a big warehouse where just as far as the eye can see, bits and pieces of all sorts of things. You've got fabric costumes, you've got fiberglass moulds, and he said, we can't find the mould, can you look for it? It's yellow. So I'm thinking, well, if I say sorry, I don't. That's an unreasonable thing to ask me just through the door. Obviously, that's not the best first impression. So I go around looking for, every yellow thing in sight, and I can't find it. And I say, look, I'm really sorry. If you could describe it in any more clarity to me. Somebody looks under their desk and picks it up and goes, ah, it's here. And it was green. So I spent the majority of that time casting up pieces of the helmet. It was just a half mask, and it was black. And because it had a hood on it, you saw hardly any of it actually on screen. They were really nicely detailed, though. And yes, I started off casting them. We had to make 2 new full costumes for the finale episode, and then 2 dummy ones, I think, for blowing up and cutting to pieces and things like that. And then as the sort of 2 weeks went on, we were distressing the costumes. The beautifully sewn costumes, I had the job of throwing wet brown acrylic paint at it, just ruining them and putting sandpaper all over them. And yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I got to see all the monsters that were going to come out that I couldn't talk about, and then lockdown happened, and I haven't really felt like getting on a train to London again.
Yeah, and I know as far as con circuits go, you prefer smaller cons like this to bigger ones as well, for many and various reasons. That's something that we necessarily go into this we need to. No. But do you find that actually you now prefer what you're doing, working on your own individual projects, and then on to sort of smaller scale projects like that, as to the way that these bigger industry complexes work?
That is a multifaceted question.
I never said this would be easy.
Self-employment is very different from working for an effects house. On the one hand, you get so much more creative control. You haven't got people coming and sniffing at your work and going, yeah, mind if I take that off you? You know, you get to design creatures a lot of the time if you've got an independent filmmaker coming up to you and saying, we need something about this big, something that looks like this, we've got somebody to draw it for us, can you make it? Yeah, you can choose the workflow, you can choose what material it has to be, so there's a lot of freedom to be had there. But then on the other hand, it's only you when things go wrong. And it does seem that more often than not, something will go wrong, and you'll be sort of painted into a corner. You've got 24 hours left to fix this situation, and then out of nowhere, some part of your brain just flashes into life, and you go and mix materials together that you weren't even intending to use, and you get it done, and there I am sitting afterwards thinking, well, I don't know where that came from, but I'm glad it did, and how do I do that again? So I would say working as a self-employed creature maker, you really do learn the hard way, but the things you learn, you probably wouldn't learn if you worked as part of a huge team and everything went to plan all the time. You wouldn't need to exercise those sort of panic muscles.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes some of the best discoveries come about through that whole process, panic and accidental trial and error.
I'll quickly talk about a full-body swamp creature I was asked to make in the summer. Somebody said, we'd like to make a film with a few different creatures, but there's this swamp creature. We're going to go to Scotland and put this costume on and fully submerge our actor in a lake. And I'm already thinking, oh yeah, this is going to be fun. And he said, we're going to be filming it on proper 35mm film, black and white. I thought, I'm in! So at first I had these grand ideas of doing a full-body life cast of a person, and just for context, it was like a crab pose the actor had to be in, and the head was on the back of their head, so they sort of looked like the knees bent the wrong way, as the head faced forward. So I had this grand idea of life casting somebody and sculpting all the muscles and the skin textures, making a great big mould of that, and then filling it with super soft silicone, and you know, it would look like a professional Hollywood-style creature. And then reality set in, and I thought, well, what can I do? I know, scaffolding. I could make a person in that pose out of scaffolding, and then wrap it with bubble wrap to make a sort of a bespoke mannequin and cling film around that. And then I got a morph suit, you know, the stretchy all-in-one suits, and I put that on this scaffolding. And from this point onwards, our neighbours, who we don't talk to, sort of looking over at this all-in-black creature person in perpetual crab pose in the garden. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to go mixed media. Now, mixed media terrifies me. I don't like not knowing how the final product is going to look. But I had this flash of inspiration that if I get a stretchy lycra material and a hot glue gun, and I sort of hot glue the shapes of the muscles over this morph suit, and then I get a watering can and fill it with beanbag beads, and sort of poke it in each stretchy pocket and pour the beanbag beads into the muscles. I built up 2 or 3 layers of muscle and skin this way, and then I coated the whole thing with latex. And what beanbags did was, whereas sometimes if you have a rubber creature in a film and they move and their arm sort of creases and goes flat, it ruins the illusion immediately. But what these did was they didn't allow those forms to collapse, and so they moved with the body. So I don't think the film's out yet, but you see this creature coming out of the swamp, and it moves its shoulders up like that, and the muscles contract as it moves. I could have done it with silicone, but I'd have probably made a loss on the whole thing. But you know, things like that, and you think, I've never done it before. Where the heck did that come from? But every time I need to make a creature from now on, you know what, I'm going to be buying beanbag beads.
Yeah, it's the whole thing is a problem-solving exercise, I guess, isn't it? So let's talk a little bit about the different techniques that you use. So on the end of the table, we brought a couple of examples in. The end of the table, staring at you, is Julian Bleach's version of Davros. Signed, in fact, by
it is. Isn't it? Julian Bleach, as far as I know, has only ever attended one convention, and that is probably the only Davros head he's ever signed.
Right. I'm still going to use the cartoon thing. Explain to everybody how the process of making a mask that happens. So you start in clay?
Yes, so with him, I actually started by sculpting the actor himself, because it's one thing to sculpt Davros, it's another thing to make the right Davros, whose head is the right shape, if that makes sense. The Millennium Effect had it easy, they just molded the actor. But, so I got pictures of Julian Bleach and sculpted a very, very basic head sculpture of him to get the structure right. Made a mould, cast that in fiberglass, and then on top of that I sculpted these sort of prosthetic layer. This is actually fiberglass, so it looks rubbery, but it's completely solid. This was it started off as a wax-based sculpture. There's two types of clay that you can use. There's water-based clay, which is great. It's easy to work with. You spray it with a squirty gun, you can make it nice and soft. You can get one kind of texture. You let it get drier and it gets firmer, and you can put in little skin pores and all the really fine textures. But the trouble is, if you take it 5 minutes out for a coffee, you come back and it's dry and it's cracked and it's killed itself. But this wax-based clay never dries out, so it's a bit of a trickier process sometimes for the texture. But a sculpture like this, you could leave it for a year and come back to it, and it might have some dust on it, but it would still be perfectly workable. On top of that, then, once I was happy with the sculpture itself, I made a silicone mould. So I painted silicone rubber over in several layers, and then once that was done, make a cut up the back, take that off, and that's your negative. When I fiberglass inside that, I end up with a solid positive, which I can remove, paint up. This is a wooden, it's mostly wooden, this is a threaded rod. Mostly just glued together and sat on him. A bit of sewing. If I can avoid sewing, I do, because I cannot bear sewing. But there he is. It's a multi-step process, and sometimes if you have a particular outcome in mind, and you know that you need a translucent piece of work, or you need something to be flexible so it can stick on someone's face, it will inform the kind of mould you make, the kind of clay you use, even the kinds of paints that you use. But for display, most of them are solid fiberglass, just because if you're putting these things in the back of a car, you don't want them to get squished on the way. So does that answer your question?
Absolutely. What's the kind of, I know it's difficult to quantify something like that, but what's the time scale for a sculpt like that in terms of that level of detail?
If it's in the professional world, you're in minus time, always. If it's just a for you, for fun project, you can take a year if you want. And some of my projects have taken me, say, 2 years to complete. But I think he took a few months. He was an early enough sculpt that I was still feeling my way around the sort of anatomical techniques that you have to pick up. The very first time I attempted to sculpt a human face, just a normal human, no creaturey bits, it took me 9.5 months. And then the second one took about 4 months. And then the third one took 4 weeks. And then before you know it, I can make something like the Frankenstein's monster in a month. In fact, the Frankenstein's monster, which I'm currently painting, and feel free to drop by and have a chat with me at some point, working on that one. He was a mask in a month for Halloween. October the 1st, I started roughing out Boris Karloff's face, and then by October 31st, I was wearing it, scaring people.
Cool.
And do take a moment when you can, of course, the weekend to have a look in, close-up detail of these, because looking at them from a distance is one thing, but actually looking at them up close is something quite different. Which do you prefer? Because you've sculpted Anthony Ainley, you've sculpted Sylvester McCoy recently. I know I've seen both of those. Which do you prefer sculpting? Do you prefer sculpting likenesses of actors, or is the creature stuff?
That's a really good question. I would say the creatures are generally a lot easier because they were artificial to start with. They are the product of somebody having a design and putting clay on and giving it a quick texture with a damp towel or something like that, and there's your monster. A person obviously is grown, literally, and it's sometimes very difficult to really sort of copy what nature has done so easily. And the threshold is so much higher, because if you sculpt a person and let's say something is a few millimeters off, you can tell it's not a person. It's hideous, it's terrifying, because we're so naturally evolved to spot if a person is slightly wonky or off. I think it's because back in the primordial times we had to know from sight that person's ill, they're probably leprous, let's keep away from them. So we have this uncanny valley in us, which means that if you see a sculpture and it's not absolutely spot on, I mean, let Madame Tussauds, for example, get a lot of flack. They try very hard, but they get a lot of flack because if something is just very slightly off, and it only takes one employee to do something slightly off, people will rip into it, absolutely. So I do put myself at risk sculpting something like Sylvester McCoy. It takes longer, and generally they don't sell maybe as well as the monsters do. So I think it's important to practice the anatomy, and from a sort of academic point of view, have a go at making a person portrait. But the monsters are fun. I enjoy the monsters.
Has Sylvester seen this sculpt?
He has. He saw it at the day I was painting it, really, because I like to take things along and work on them, because it's one thing, I think, to have a display of finished work and go, don't touch that, but actually to have a sculpture on the go or a painting on the go, people can come in and go, maybe I could do that too. And then you get to talk to them, and you might inspire an artist to give up on their school life as well.
What did he think of it?
I don't know.
He didn't
well, somebody put it online, and because it was on display, someone photographed it, put it online, and then somebody who knew him texted it to him, and I think the response was something like, why? you never know because you don't get the tone of voice.
Yeah,
it could have been, a happy wife. Why? There's my face. Or it could have been a why? I'm going to believe that he was so overcome he just couldn't type it out in full.
Yes, I'm sure you're absolutely right. Let's talk about a couple of the other projects, because your sculpting and creatures, creature work like that isn't the only thing that you do. You talked about the need to build Daleks earlier on. Everybody should have a need to build Daleks, should tell us a little bit about the reconstruction of Lost Episode broadcast, the Mission of the Unknown. How did that come about, and what was your involvement in this project?
You know, even when I was through the door, I wasn't entirely sure how it had come about. I remember the first I ever heard that a university wanted to remake one of the lost episodes of Doctor Who was it was Home Base. It was the Home Base closing down sale. They were selling off bits of pole and chrome curtain rail, which makes good Dalek plunger pieces and things like that. And they were selling them off really cheaply. So here I was walking around thinking, oh, I could use that for that, etc. And I pick up I think it was a curtain pole, and my dad cryptically leans in and says, we'll be needing a lot of that soon. Will we? And he said, oh, I thought I told you. No? I've volunteered us for a university project. What? He said, well, on the Project Dalek forum.
Just on Facebook.
Oh, it was on Facebook, was it? I know it was on multiple platforms. The University of Central Lancashire had put out a plea for Dalek owners because they wanted to remake a lost episode with the blessing of the BBC, but we can't tell you any more about it. So of course everyone's going, it seems a bit scammy, to be honest. But well, I think Dad just saw it and it said, have you got a Dalek? And we looked around and decided that we did. He said, well, you know, a lot of people have built their Daleks and they take them out to events for the sole purpose of going, oh, don't touch that. But we always made our Dalek. I mentioned before I was only about 10 when we started it. With the sole purpose of having fun. We took it out and I would sit inside it and trundle about, and we must have done well over 50 events in the time we've had it. And so in that spirit of fun, I think we said, yeah, let's do it, let's volunteer. What could go wrong? If they're willing to push us up, then sure, we'll do it. It'll probably be a barn and, you know, a few 17-year-olds with a movie camera. But it wasn't. As it started to get closer to the time where we had to load this thing up and go off, we started to get indications that maybe there was a bit more to it. You know, I was looking at the sort of timetable, and I was there, I think I was Dalek 2 out of 3. And then I saw Nick Briggs in the sort of box along, and I thought, well, what the heck is he doing there? And he's doing the voices, what? Edward D'Souza, who originally played Mark Corey in Mission to the Unknown, will be along to quality control, I suppose. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, this is quite exciting. I mean, even if it's no good, it's worth going along just to see this. It was a shame they only got a small number of Dalek volunteers to go to it. But then again, I think their PR was a little bit, because they were so cagey in their original request, they didn't get quite so many. And then we turned up, and I walked in, and I'm faced with the world of 60s BBC sets. And I mean, I'm not a morning person. I don't do the first half of the day. But when I just walked in and suddenly I was not in a university anymore. I was in Doctor Who. I thought, oh, I'm awake now. They had the round evil plotting table that the alien delegates all chant around, and then they had the interior of a rocket spaceship. and that was day one. It was a 3-day shoot, and the second and third days were in the jungle doing the really exciting bits with the crashed spaceship, and you know, we'd be going around exterminating the survivors. It's a really bleak episode for anyone who hasn't seen it, Mission to the Unknown. It's the only episode in Doctor Who's history where the Doctor doesn't turn up and everyone dies. So, yeah, I quickly realised that this was quite exciting, and I thought, well, I hope the cameras do it justice, you know, because there'd be nothing worse than going to all this effort, and it's in colour and it's, you know, camcorder quality. But when you sit in a Dalek, you've got your seat, you've got your feet there to move around, and you've got the gun and the plunger, and you've also got, with your third arm, to do the eye stalk, and then with your fourth arm, you've got to flash the lights as Nick Briggs sits there in the corner, you know, with his microphone doing that voice, and you get this round gauze in the next section, which you can look around, and it's very fuzzy, as is wearing any kind of creature costume. All the best gigs of my life I've only seen through a fuzzy. It's how I stay humble. On the other people's assurance I was there. You know, everyone else you can sort of see their faces, but I was there. I was able to look around, and you know, it's quite exciting to be on the suddenly on the set of Doctor Who, and the cameras they've gone right. Quick rehearsal. They were planning to put students in the Daleks, which is a ridiculous idea because it takes practice to work those forearms at once to move a Dalek around. And so me and Mike, between us, had insisted that if we lend our Dalek out, the person who's used to operating it will sit in it. And they said, all right, yeah, sure. But the poor Dalek Supreme opposite me, they sort of took this student, I'm not even sure he was the right way up, they just screwed the lid on and said, right, we'll have a rehearsal, flash the lights, he flashed the lights, and I'm, you know, just twitching the bits here and there, and I'm looking around me as we're filming, and this other student obviously has no idea what to do, nothing's moving, and I'm thinking, come on, move the Dalek a bit more. But I look around and all the lights are off, just the spotlight's on us, we're all acting, and there's this little TV monitor by Nick Briggs, and it's black and white and it's fuzzy, and it's clearly Doctor Who, because there are monsters in it, you know, and I'm thinking, they're watching Doctor Who over there, they're comparing it to the original, hang on, the original's lost. And then my second, call me slow, but my second thought was, Nick Briggs has Mission to the Unknown. But then my third thought was, shit, that's me! Don't we look good?
Love it.
All the aliens are moving around, and I think that looks like the photos we've got. Yeah, and so I'm moving. You can watch me in the finished product, moving the gun and the plunger around. But believe me, my head is looking at the monitor. And I think throughout pretty much the rest of the shoot, I was always there, by the way. I was watching that monitor. It was happening in real life in front of me. I was watching the monitor because they couldn't assure us we'd ever see it. They said the BBC might release it, which they did eventually, as an episode of Doctor Who, which was fantastic. But I was very aware that this might be the only chance I get to see the Varga plants on screen moving about, or the Daleks shooting down these survivors. So, in the Dalek, out of the Dalek, I was still watching that screen, just in absolute heaven. I mean, who wouldn't be?
Yeah.
If you're a fan of Doctor Who, if you're a fan of lost media, suddenly you're becoming that media. And the jungle. I think I realised, and I have got into filmmaking a bit after that, down the line thanks to lockdown and everything, but it was doing Mission to the Unknown that I realised, in black and white, it forgives a lot of sins. You know, the jungle set, for example, there's a massive spaceship in the centre of the room. There is a black cyclorama curtain around the back of the room, and there's some foliage, sort of pots put around the place and stapled to the curtain, these sort of vines and hanging things. And I'm thinking, well, this is all right, but what happens when they need to pick this rocket up and move it out of the way. But then I learned, when it's in black and white, what looks to us like a really shallow set, the black curtain becomes the void in the distance, and you can't tell that it's a small, you can't tell that those leaves are only a foot behind the Dalek. And this rocket, if they want to film a bit in the jungle without the rocket in it, they just have to put a pot plant right really close to the camera in front of where the spaceship is. And it's gone! I would never have thought of that.
And the results are absolutely stunning. I don't know whether anybody has seen it. Where can people watch it?
BBC YouTube channel.
There's a QR code on our side.
Perfect. Scan the QR code on Mike and James' table if you want to go straight to it. But yes, BBC's YouTube channel has this available to watch, and it is absolutely brilliant. You talked about going into filmmaking after this. So let's talk a little bit about your lockdown project. Puppets.
Puppets. Right, so this here is Mr. Cavor.
Oh, wow.
He's in a steampunk spacesuit. That's it. First Men in the Moon, H.G. Wells. So, I do a lot of Amdram, and we were really looking forward in early 2020 to do a stage adaptation of The Lady Killers. And in about a week, I think it was exactly 10 days before we opened, we had the best pre-sales online in our group's history. We had to pay it all back because we went into lockdown. Unfortunately, we saw it coming, but then it was too late. And we suddenly all found ourselves stuck indoors, and they were saying in 6 weeks it'll be over. I thought, no, it is not going to be over. I'm going to have to find a new hobby. And I had been, for a while leading up to this, trying to push in a more independent direction. You know, I'd done the Doctor Who, I had worked on Doctor Who, I'd been a darling in Doctor Who. At what point am I going to actually start doing James Burgess work? You know, because there's replica making, and then there's coming up with your own ideas, and at some point, whether people encourage it or not, you have got to make your own mark. And I've been trying to make little models and things. We've got some mummified fairies.
Yes, I love them.
On the table. Got lots of them. I'll be painting them up over the weekend. I just couldn't get anyone interested in them. Oh, they're interested now, but at the time. And I thought, well, what can I do as someone who's known as a Doctor Who person, trying to now become an artist? And I think of art as the combination of technical skill and ideas, unique, creative ideas. And I thought, well, eventually I came to the conclusion that the only way I was going to get people invested in my own art was to take the technical skill and make nice looking things, but put them in a story. Because stories take people on a journey, and especially right now when we're locked in our homes, people are lapping up stories. You know, we can't go anywhere, we need to escape. All the neighbouring theatre groups were doing webcam pantomimes and Zoom Shakespeare, and God, it was it felt like being put in lockdown all over again. But so I thought we need to take people on an adventure to the moon, as I'm sure we'd all like to do right now, you know. And so I said to my theatre group, right, you lot, you can't go on a stage, but if you record your voices and send them in to me, and then me and my brother, he's a 3D printer, and as in he does 3D printing, and he does 3D modelling and printing, and I do sculpting and creature making. Between us, we can probably make some puppets and make this almost Jerry Anderson inspired film. It's more of a mini-series. It's in 4 parts, and 3 of them are up on YouTube, and the final one has been a real labour of love, because it's the last one, I've got to do it right, which will eventually go out, and then I'll edit it all together into one. But yes, that was the idea. If we don't put something out there to show that we're still doing something, people will forget about us. And then when you get out of lockdown, everyone's forgotten you. But this might be the chance I've been looking for to do something original and unique. And yet, as an artist, it's been the making of me. Because the Museum of Classic Sci-Fi has got one of my creatures in it from the first Men in the Moon. People have become fans of this who otherwise never would have heard of me, or even, you know, this really local theatre group. I'm absolutely over the moon that people in Vietnam are watching their work.
And how did you go about the actual filming process? So yes, you know, people can send in the audio at the time, and then you 3D print, you know, design 3D printed over the puppets.
Yeah.
How do you then? What was your process for animating or otherwise?
So it's all on strings. It was very much a ground up project. I had a camera which was all right. It wasn't very good. For the first part, and then my first ever marionettes, and then by part 2, we said, okay, that was good, but what do we need now? We need a better camera, that's for sure. We need to update the puppets, and then we started thinking, okay, now we've done the bare basics, we could make that better by making the eyes sort of fit into sockets as balls, so that we can move them about, we can pose them shot for shot. If we put some hair gel on the eyes, that will gloss them up, so they'll sparkle on the camera. If we got a fog machine, we could make the atmosphere look denser. Because you don't think about it, but you do. When you're filming and your character is this big, on screen you need the atmosphere to therefore be that much denser. That's about 6th scale. You need that fog to be 6 times denser to show up and look normal on the screen. So yeah, every time we're filming anything, we get the fog machine out, and Robin gets quite disappointed if we don't. But he's even 3D printed his own specially designed diffuser, which goes on the front to make it come out in just the right pattern. We took a leaf out of Mission to the Unknown's book by saying, okay, black velvet. We'll make one of the walls just black velvet. It looks terribly posh, but it is just for filming purposes. That is space. You know, we can pin a paper printout of the Earth or something on it, and it does look really good. But we really do champion this simplistic, bare basics kind of very tangible filmmaking style. We've avoided CGI altogether because I'm not a prude. It's great, but for what this is, it's a sort of grassroots film project. I don't want to be playing around with CGI and things because people appreciate the fact that it's a physical model. I hope they appreciate that it takes 12 attempts at every single take, because, you know, a puppet, this one here, I'll just take his helmet off. His head rotates like this, and there's a certain amount of wobble on it. So we had a bit of fishing line attached to the bottom of the neck, and it went up through the back here. To try and get him to turn and look at something, there is such a fine line between a puppet going zoop and a person going and it might take you 12 attempts to get him to turn his head in just the right way. So in terms of hours of footage, I have got flash drives just full of footage. If we lost the footage, we'd have enough to make it 12 times over, just with the unused takes.
Yeah.
But then, you know, some of them are really bad. But sometimes the set just falls over. Robin, what did you do? I don't know. I just breathed. We've built up quite a collection of miniature furniture and
there's a lovely example on the table of a kind of Welsh dresser as well, which you can go and have a look at. But again, QR code on the table for this one?
Yeah, I've just done it all.
Yeah, so I do, again, go and have a look at what's already up online. It's fantastic. I'm aware of the time, but I know that the next thing that's up is lunch, so that's okay if people...
Oh, they don't need that. Let's keep going.
It's fine. If people want to go and get food, they can. But I just want to wrap up. I want to throw it open to people to ask questions, because I'm sure people will have lots of questions. But there's one final thing that I do want to ask, because it's intriguing me. Your theatre group What are you doing next?
Oh yeah, we're doing the Invisible Man.
How are you doing?
Well, I can tell you that with no fishing line whatsoever, because this was one of those pre-lockdown projects. 2019, we'd just done a Oliver Twist, and I found myself stranded at a train station, and I felt like I'd gone back in time because it was practically gaslit, and there was nobody there, and I had to wait over an hour for the next train. And all I had was this book of The Invisible Man. And so I sat and read it under this really yellow sodium light shining down on me, and I thought, this is actually really creepy. Let's do a winter thriller of The Invisible Man, and let's scare people's pants off and show a side of theatre that we've never really lent into. Because the group's about 80 years old, they've been going and going and going, but every end of year wintry thing, they've always made some kind of a pantomime or a fun romp of some kind. We've never actually tried to make people soil themselves.
It's important.
Well, it is. So I've written it and I'm directing it. We're finally doing it. And people, from the very word go, even in 2019, people would say, when I said to them, I'm going to do The Invisible Man, the first thing they'd always say was, are you going to use fishing line for that? No. Are you going to use fishing line for that? No. Are you going to... Right, that's it. We're not using an inch of fishing line. And then lockdown happens, and what do I work with? Fishing line. So yeah, 30th of November to the 3rd of December. It's quite a way from Plymouth to Northampton, but I'm sure we can record it.
I would love to see it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
If there's interest.
Right in the next
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
It would be fantastic. Is it effects heavy? Yeah.
Yes, there's quite a lot of... normally everybody pitches in, as I'm sure you know, everyone lends a hand to make things. There are some specially scanned 3D printed sculpting, almost stage magic effect props that I've said, look, I need your help on this lot, but it's not my baby. It's a lot, but let me do it. So you'll find a lot of... I think of it all like a magic show with a storyline, as opposed to a storyline with occasional effects.
I think it's been brilliant. It's one of the only plays you can go and watch and then say that you didn't see it.
I came to see The Invisible Man,
Yeah.
and I left sorely disappointed.
I'm going to throw it open to people who want to ask questions, but first, before I do, in case anybody does want to leave, can you please at this stage show your gratitude? You take the opportunity to chat to James and Mike over the course of the weekend, have a look at what James is painting and so on. The one final thing that I will say before I ask him any questions as well is that you said that your Doctor Who scarf, for example, is a thing that people can buy. Are there other things that people can buy as opposed to look at?
Oh, yes, mostly the things that I'm painting. The mummified fairies. As soon as they're painted, take them. For money, but you know. The Doctor Who scarf, I'd be quite happy not to go over with that. The Lynx, Sontaran, and the Frankenstein, as soon as they're painted up, it's just spaced in the car. So, you know, come along and talk to me about that if anyone would like to discuss it.
If you want to discuss terms, or if you want to commission something, then do chat to James. Would anybody like to ask him questions?
Was that the mask that Terry Malloy wore?
No.
That was the mask that Julian Bleach wore in the new series.
Okay.
This is the question, isn't it? Have you made me yet, Terry Malloy?
Haven't made me yet. Terry Malloy has been on my case.
Yes.
He has been the only Davros I haven't sculpted. You'll see on the table at the back of the room a clay Davros head from the 80s, which pretty much I think as soon as I get back from Armadacon will be I'll be making the fiberglass mold and casting masters of it, and then Terry Malloy finally leave me alone.
Terry at other cons will know he is a bit of a character, isn't he?
Brilliant.
Winding me up for some time. Yeah. Anything else anybody would like to ask?
As a professional now, you obviously have access to materials and techniques that you... Thinking back to your amateur days, did you ever have any experiences attempting to explain to providers why you wanted some strange thing to... Just to give you an example from my experience, I attempted to buy some liquid latex at one time, and halfway through the description I realised what I was buying sounded extremely dodgy.
I can see room for confusion there, yeah. Well, there are lots of examples of, not me personally, but effects people having used some surprising items and materials in their iconic effects. I mean, for example, apparently if you work in the effects world, you need a never-ending supply of condoms. Because you can inflate them with air and make sort of bladdery things that inflate. I've heard of far stranger things than that being used.
KY jelly's very big, isn't it, in Aliens?
Yes, I think they broke open a glow stick and mixed it in with this jelly and used that as a sort of glowing blood. Yes, once or twice in the first Men in the Moon I thought I could, just so I can join that weird club and say I've used that. But then I sort of remember that my younger brother's helping me out and I go, yeah, no, I won't. Because then I'll have to explain to him what it is.
Yes, that's probably for the best.
I will tell you, when I was at college, they had a massive cupboard full of materials and things that they never used for anything, just because they bought it with their budget, but then no one was trained to use it. So I helped them by lightening some of that pain. And my proudest claim to fame was the day that I smuggled out 14 feet of aluminium wire down my trousers.
Wow.
I need to make a Dalek gun. And of course the Dalek gun, it's got these sort of rods around this tube. So I got the plans up on my phone and I measured up how much I need, 14 feet. So I sort of cut it into the appropriate lengths, and I thought, if I tuck the bottom end into my sock and then have it coming up my leg. So I sort of limped out to the bus. It's 2 buses each way from the college to my house. So there I am, and then one of my college friends, she wanted to sit next to me and talk to me all the way. And I vividly remember when I got up to leave the bus, my trousers sort of gave out, and I had to sort of hold it the second bus home, and then I was a bit sort of scratched at the bottom. Yes. They never suspected a thing.
I don't know whether I should just leave it there.
Yeah. Last name.
Go on.
May I take a photograph of you and the mask?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll wrap up at that point. Thank you everybody for coming to this panel. HP Lunchcraft is on for those who want to... Yes, it's a thing. You haven't read the programme properly, have you?
Why would I read the programme?
Yeah. For those that want to go and do some crafting, HP Lunchcraft is available in the usual place. Otherwise, more things will happen this afternoon. The auction is next, so don't spend too much over lunch, okay, because you know how the auction works.
Great.